That's Genesis chapter 33, and we'll be reading from verse 1 till verse 20. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. "Who are these with you?" he asked. Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." Then the maidservants and their children approached and bowed down. Next Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, "What do you mean by all these droves I met?" "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," he said. But Esau said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "No, please," said Jacob, "if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. Then Esau said, "Let us be on our way. I'll accompany you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are tender, and that I must care for the ewes and cows that are nursing their young. If they are driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I move along slowly at the pace of the droves before me and that of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." Esau said, "Then let me leave some of my men with you." "But why do that?" asked Jacob. "Just let me find favor in your eyes, in the eyes of my Lord." So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel.
Good morning, my dear friends.
Morning.
It's good to see you all this morning. And we are back in Genesis and the life of Jacob, watching all and observing all the things he was up to. And we are astounded at some stages in his life what he did, and that God could actually be gracious to him, because he wasn't a very pleasant character most of the time. Now today we are looking at the story where Jacob and Esau is reconciled, where they meet each other again. Remember, Jacob fled from the land of Canaan because he stole his brother's birthright, and then he also stole his brother's blessing. He acted like he was his brother. His father was very old and blind, acted like he was his brother, and he received the blessing of the firstborn, although he wasn't the firstborn. And then Esau wanted to kill him. So last week we saw that Jacob in chapter 32, that Jacob had a life-changing experience. He had that night struggle with the angel of the Lord. First of all, he thought it was a man. And then as the struggle went on through the night, he realized that it was not a man, it was somebody greater, and that it was the angel of the Lord. And we said, for those of you who know, who've been in this church for a while, will know that the angel of the Lord is just an appearance in the Old Testament of the pre-incarnate Christ. So it's Jesus in the Old Testament, if we can say it in that way. So he appeared as the angel of the Lord, or the messenger of Yahweh, which is the term I prefer, because when people hear angel, they think of things with feathers and wings and stuff, and that's not what we're talking about. So Jacob then received a new name, and his name was changed from Jacob, which means deceiver, or one who grabs the heel, to Israel. And we said that the name Israel means he who struggles with God. But there's also a play of words. It could also mean the upright one, because those words for struggle and upright are very similar in Hebrew. So his name could mean the upright one. It's interesting when the prophets speak to Israel, often when they bring a message from God to the people of Israel, and it's meant as a rebuke, they would use the name Jacob, which means deceiver, deceptive. Whenever they speak to Israel and God is happy with the way Israel is going on, the way they are acting, he often uses the word Jeshurun, which is derived from the same word, the same root that the first part of Israel is made up of. And Jeshurun means the upright one, the upright one. And here was Jacob, who was now Israel, or Jeshurun, and he's returning to the land of Canaan. Now, if you remember the last passage we read, that he sent his wives and maidservants and children, he sent them over the Jabbok River. Esau was coming up from the south, and if you have a picture of the map of Israel in your mind, you will know that it's the Dead Sea and the Jordan River, and the river Jabbok flows into the Jordan River from the east. Esau was coming up from the south, so Jacob sent his family across the river to the north. They are on the other side of the river. But somewhere during the break of the new day, when the new day dawned, Jacob must have brought them back over the river, because now they were all heading south, which is another indication that God had worked in the heart and the mind of Jacob, is where he sent them over in order for them to maybe escape if Esau decided to attack them. Now Jacob was a man who was changed. He was a new man. He was a man now full of trust and in faith in God. And he brought them back over the river, and the whole group started moving south in the direction in which Esau came. So we're going to look at three things this morning briefly. And the first is Jacob's fearless demeanor. Jacob's fearless demeanor. We read in verse 1 that there Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. And so he divided up his family into groups, in groups of favor, in the groups that he considered most will receive most honor. So in other words, he started with first his maidservants and then his wives. And he had two maidservants. The first one was called Bilhah, and she went behind Jacob. He was walking in front, and behind him came Bilhah with her two sons, Dan and Naphtali. Behind her came Zilpah with Gad and Asher, and then Leah followed after with Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And then lastly came Rachel with Joseph. Now, what was different about this arrangement was that in the past, when he sent his family over the Jabbok River and divided them into groups, he had in his mind that Esau would attack them, and he hoped that some of them would escape in case of an attack. Now he was fearlessly walking towards Esau. He was in front, and he arranged them in their positions of honor, with his maidservants in front, and then his second wife, and then his most favorite wife, Rachel, at the back. Now, I just want to say something here about these 4 wives, because they were basically all 4 his wives. Because the Bible tells us a story doesn't mean that the Bible or the author agrees with Jacob's life, that this was God's plan, that a man should have 4 wives. The whole plan from the beginning was one man and one woman. And we remember when Jesus said, in the beginning, God made them male and female, and therefore a man should leave his father and mother, and he should cleave unto his wife. So, because Jacob had 4 wives, doesn't mean that God thought this was a good arrangement. It was because of the sinful behavior. We know that his father Isaac had only 1 wife, and we know that Joseph, his favorite son, had how many wives? He was the second in command of Egypt. He only had 1 wife. Her name was Asnath. And so this is just to tell the story. And it was, John Calvin says that it's the way that somebody would meet a dignitary or a prince. That was the arrangement. He was considering Esau a man of great honor, so he arranged them in their sequence of honor in his own life. So as Esau met them, he would introduce them one by one until he got to his most favorite wife. The other thing I want to mention is that he doesn't mention that he had any daughters. He did have. He had plenty of daughters, I'm sure, but in those days you just didn't note the daughters in the text. So here Jacob comes and he meets Esau and he bows down 7 times. And maybe he was remembering that blessing that his father spoke to him. You know what his father said? He says, "May the sons of your mother bow down to you." That was the blessing that Isaac pronounced on him back then when he stole Esau's blessing. And now he was bowing down to his brother. In his earlier days, he was a man that relied on his own wits and his own scheming and his own ideas to get ahead in life. But now he was a changed man, and he came in humility, but without fear, to meet his brother Esau. What happened next was quite unexpected, because Esau, we read in verse 4, ran out and grabbed him around the neck and kissed him. And this must have been the work of God in the heart of Esau. Because we remember the threats that Esau uttered 20 years before, when Jacob had deceived him that he was going to kill him. And we are told that Esau meets his brother with unexpected benevolence and kindness because of the effect of the special favor of God. That is John Calvin's words. It's the favor of God. It was God working in the heart and in the life of Esau. The second thing we want to notice, apart from the fact that now Jacob wasn't a fearful man anymore, he was full of confidence, he had a fearless demeanor. The second thing is Jacob's gracious gift. We look at Jacob's gracious gift. It reads in verse 5, it says, Esau looked up and he saw the women and children. He said, "Who are these? Who are these?" And it's interesting the way that Jacob presents them. He uses a different word to blessing. Remember, he stole Esau's blessing. So he didn't say, these are the people God blessed me with. Because if you use the word blessing, that would have reminded Esau that Jacob actually stole his blessing. So he uses a very clever way of presenting them. He said that they are gracious gifts. They are gracious gifts from the Lord. Notice there in verse 5, he says, "These are the children God has graciously given your servant." And then he introduced them one by one. And he uses the word there is not blessing, but grace, in order to make sure that Esau doesn't get offended. Then Esau inquired, what is all these droves of animals? Remember, he divided the animals up into groups, camels and goats and donkeys and whatever else he had. And he sent his servants ahead to meet Esau with these droves of animals. Now he wanted initially to buy Esau's favor. He was fearful that Esau wanted to kill him, and he thought that if I give him all these presents of all these hundreds of animals, Esau would be favorably disposed towards me. But now his attitude and the reason why he wanted to give them to Esau had changed. First, it was out of impure motives, because of a fearful and a self-reliant nature and desire to save himself. But now it was genuinely to find favor with his brother. He couldn't believe that his brother, after all these years, would accept him in such a wonderful way. That his brother would forgive him for what he had done. Throw his arms around his neck and hug him and kiss him and weep with him. And God prepared him for this act of forgiveness. And now Jacob is so overwhelmed that he sincerely wants to give these presents to Esau. He doesn't want this now to try and buy Esau's favor, but out of thankfulness. He couldn't believe it. And he compares his brother's forgiveness to God's forgiveness. Notice what he says in verse 10. He says, "For seeing your face is like seeing the face of God." Where do you think he got that from? Remember in Genesis 32, after his night struggle, what did he call that place? Peniel, the face of God. So this was fresh in his memory, and he says, I saw the face of God last night, he thought, and he said, seeing my brother in his forgiveness is like seeing the face of God. He knew that God had worked not only in his own life, but also in the life of his brother. And he wanted to return some of the blessing. He could never undo what he had done, but he wanted to return some of the blessing that God had given him, from out of which he had cheated Esau. And he gave these animals as a gracious gift to Esau. And even though Esau didn't want them, Jacob kept on. And eventually Esau reluctantly accepted these. Now, we can learn a lot of things from these verses. That when God changes us, we change from fearful people, fearing all kinds of things. The first point I mentioned this morning. We change from fearful people to people who face whatever challenges, whatever danger may come. Maybe it's COVID. Maybe you're fearful of COVID. But your attitude towards life changes, because you know that God is in control of your life. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, you must remember, I've given you life and I've given you salvation. I've given you the greater things. Why will I not give you all the other things you need for life? Your life is not something you organized. It was something given to you graciously by the hand of God. God gave you life. He can take it away. He can take it away anytime He wants. We don't know how many hours we have got left in this life. Maybe it's an enemy. Maybe it's somebody at work. Maybe it's some circumstance. Maybe you're afraid of people from another political party. Maybe you are living in a situation where you are vulnerable to crime, old age, whatever it is that makes you fearful. Jacob was a changed man because he saw God. He met with God. And that is the thing that changes you. The second thing there is that Jacob, instead of trying to wheel and deal and try and organize for his own benefit in life, he now became a gracious man. And he recognized the favor of God in other people's lives towards him. Because remember, that's part of the blessing. It's part of the initial blessing which God promised Abram and then Isaac and then Jacob. He said, those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse. And Jacob was starting to see these things. And he saw the forgiveness in the life of his brother Esau, who was not a believer. He was an unbeliever. And he was a violent man. The third thing we want to mention this morning is Jacob's healthy wisdom. Jacob's healthy wisdom. Now, part of it in these next few verses is wisdom can be considered wisdom. Some parts of it, maybe you can think about this. Now, Esau just assumed that Jacob would accompany him on his way down to Seir in the land of Edom, down to the south. He came up along the Dead Sea and along the Jordan River, and he up till where he reached Jacob near the Jabbok River, and now he turned around and he was going down again to the land of Edom. And as he met Jacob coming down, he thought maybe Jacob's on the same path. He's also going there. But remember, Jacob had promised God that he would return to where? To Bethel, to Canaan, but ultimately first to Bethel. We had that first experience where he saw the stairway, or not really a stairway, we translated stairway, but it's more like a series of steps leading up to heaven. And he saw that, and he saw the angels, and he met God there at Bethel, and he promised God that he would return to that place. So his plan is to honor his promise to God, to return to Bethel. Secondly, he recognized that the blessings of God was connected to the land. The blessings were not to be had outside of the land. What did God tell Abram? He said, go to the land I will show you, and I will bless you. And I will make you a great nation, and you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you. And through you, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And what did Abram do? Did he stay in Haran? No, he went to the land. So Jacob understood that the blessing was connected with the land. And he was determined to go there. He had promised God that he would go there, and on his way there he came past a place called Sukkoth, which means shelters, and he showed sorrow for the way that he treated Esau, and he was willing to make amends, to boldly meet with his brother, to offer him gifts and to plead for forgiveness. Now when Esau said, well, come with me, Jacob, then maybe it's the old Jacob, maybe it was wisdom, maybe it was the old Jacob. What did he say? He said, no, I can't go with you. I've got lots of animals, and I've got small animals and small children, and it's a long way, and maybe I will meet up with you. But he leaves it open. In verse 14 he says, I'll come there and I'll see you until the day I come to Seir, which could mean never. It's like when a friend invites you and says, we must get together for supper sometime. And it's never going to happen. It's just a way of being nice. And that is the way that, if they say we must get together for supper sometime and they mean it, then it's wonderful. But sometimes they don't mean it. And so he says, until he comes to his Lord in Seir in verse 14, which means never. It's never going to happen. Because as soon as Esau goes south, he turns away and he heads east towards Canaan. And he also refused his brother's offer to leave some men with him. He didn't know what was the reason. Maybe it was so that Esau could keep control over him. And he knew that the men staying with him would soon realize he's not on his way down to Seir. And maybe that's the old Jacob. We don't know. Maybe it was just wise, because things can change. So he says, The thing where he falls short is that he doesn't clearly and in a straight manner say to Esau, no, Esau, I made a promise to the Lord, to Yahweh, that I must worship God in the country that he gave our fathers. And then we see that Esau is not interested really in following the demands of the covenant either, because he's not going to go back to Canaan. He goes down to Moab, not to Moab, to Edom. So what can we learn from this? Well, in the Christian life, after conversion, it's always like this. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Hopefully it's not 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. But that's the story of our lives as Christians. We experience conversion. We're now children of God. We're in the kingdom, and we move forward. And there's some things we get excited about, and we get it right, and then we take 1 step back. We slide back. It's like climbing up a slippery mountain. And so is it with the life of Jacob. He moves forward and he does some good things. He's fearless. He makes amends with his brother. He's gracious towards his brother. And then the old Jacob, the old conniving and scheming Jacob, is back again. And we may lose heart, but we know that the Lord will do whatever it takes to make us holy. And if we stay with the Word, we stay with the people of God, we use the means that God has provided for us, like prayer and fellowship and the reading of the Word, we will move forward. Which brings us to the last thing I want to mention this morning, Jacob's personal God. Notice it says in verse 33, Genesis 33, verse 18, after Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan, and he camped within sight of the city. He bought for 100 pieces of silver, he bought a plot of ground, and he set up an altar there, calling it El Elohe Israel. So it's the second piece of land. What was the first piece of land they bought? Abram and Isaac. Abram bought. It was a burial plot. So that's all they have in the land is a burial plot, and now this is the second piece of land. At the burial plot, Abram and his wives are buried, and it's at the cave of Machpelah. You can actually still go there and see it. If it's safe, not today, don't go there now, but once it's safe, you can go there. And here is the second piece of land, showing that the promises of God are slowly, very slowly, beginning to come true. And here at this plot, near the city of Shechem, he builds an altar and he calls it El Elohe Israel. What does it mean? It actually literally means the God of Israel, not the Israel the nation, Israel the man. The God of Israel is God. The God of Israel is God. Why is this so significant? Because this is the first confession after his conversion experience, where Jacob actually calls God his God. He says, this God, the God of Jacob, the God of Israel, he is God. What did he do before? Remember what he did before. He always tried to use God as a magic charm. He always wanted to make deals with everybody. He would have been a very good businessman. He wanted to make deals. He wanted to make deals with God. In Genesis 28, when he saw that vision of the stairway reaching up to heaven, he said, if God, he speaks in general, he says, if God will be with me and watch over me on this journey I'm taking, and give me food and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then Yahweh will be my God. That was his deal. Whether you're a real God or not, I don't know. But if you do these things, you give me food and clothes, you make sure I get back safely, then you will be my God. Now, that's not the way you approach God. Or he spoke about God as somebody else's God. The God of my father Abraham, my grandfather Abraham, or the fear of Isaac. Remember when he made a deal with Laban, he spoke about the fear of Isaac. He called God the fear of Isaac, or the God of my fathers. It's almost like a soccer team has a mascot, you know. They have I've seen they do all kinds of things. They put powder there near the opposing team's goalpost. They shake some powder that they received from the Sangoma, or they say certain words, and they have a mascot, and they hope that this will work for them to gain the victory. Now often people use God's name and God's person like that. God must do certain things for us. I saw a guy, I had a conversation with a guy the other week, and he had around his neck, he had a cross and a Star of David and an Ankh. That's an Egyptian religious symbol. So I said to him, "You're covering all the bases, eh?" And he said, yes, he's making sure he's got all the gods. So we often use God's name like that. But God is not a charm. Now Jacob knew this God personally, and he calls this God, he says, the God of Israel. My God is God. That's what he's saying. And he's doing the right thing. With all his faults, he's starting on the right path. And even in the story, it ends with an ominous note, which we'll look at the next time we meet on the book of Genesis. It says there that he pitched his tent. He pitched his tent near Shechem. It says there, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem and camped within sight of the city. What does this remind you of? It reminds me of another patriarch, or the brother of a patriarch by the name of Lot, who went to camp near the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And we just have this hint here. This is not where Jacob is supposed to be. He's supposed to be at Bethel, the place he called the house of God. He said, that's where I'm going to build a pillar for God's house. In Genesis 8:21, he says, if I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I've set up as a pillar will be God's house. That's at Bethel. Now he's near Shechem. And we just think something is not good. Something's going to turn out not so well here. But the good news is Jacob is a new man and God is his God. And if you want to know what happened next at Shechem, you'll have to come back again, because we won't look at it today. May we learn the lessons which we heard from the life of Jacob here this morning and apply it to our own lives. That Jacob was, after his conversion, a fearless man, a gracious man, he was a wise man, and God was now his personal God. Amen.